Imagine unlocking the most powerful teachings ever given, hidden in plain sight for centuries. The Sermon on the Mount isn't just ancient wisdom. It's a blueprint for revolutionizing your life today. You think you know it, but you've barely scratched the surface. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal 8 earth-shattering lessons that will challenge everything you thought you knew about Jesus' most famous sermon. And stick around until the end for a prayer that will transform how you apply these truths. Your spiritual journey is about to take an unexpected turn. When Jesus began his sermon with the Beatitudes, he wasn't just offering nice platitudes. He was turning the world's understanding of happiness upside down. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he said. Wait, what? How can being poor in anything lead to happiness? Here's the mind-blowing truth. Jesus was redefining success. In a world obsessed with self-promotion and material wealth, Jesus dared to say that true happiness comes from recognizing our spiritual poverty. It's about admitting we're bankrupt without God. This isn't just counterintuitive, it's revolutionary. But Jesus didn't stop there. He continued with statements that seem almost paradoxical. Blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the meek. In essence, he's saying that the path to true joy often leads through sorrow and humility. It's not about avoiding pain or always being strong. It's about finding strength in weakness and comfort in times of loss. Consider blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Jesus is telling us that true fulfillment doesn't come from satisfying our physical appetites, but from an insatiable desire for goodness and justice. He's challenging us to crave moral excellence the way we crave food and water. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. With each statement, Jesus is painting a picture of happiness that's radically different from what the world sells us. He's saying that true joy comes from giving, not taking, from integrity, not compromise, from reconciliation, not conflict. And here's the kicker. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Jesus is telling us that standing for what's right, even when it costs us, is a source of deep, lasting happiness. It's about valuing God's approval over human applause. This isn't a formula for an easy life. It's an invitation to a rich, meaningful existence that transcends circumstances. Jesus is offering us a happiness that can't be shaken by external events because it's rooted in who we are becoming, not what we have or how others perceive us. The Beatitudes aren't just beautiful sayings. They're a challenge to rethink everything we thought we knew about happiness. They're a call to find joy in unexpected places and to measure success by a divine standard. This is the radical nature of true happiness according to Jesus, and it has the power to transform not just individuals, but the entire world. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. These words from Jesus might sound like simple metaphors, but they carry a weight of responsibility and potential that's almost staggering. Let's unpack what Jesus really meant and why it's more relevant today than ever. First, salt. In Jesus' time, salt wasn't just a condiment. It was crucial for preserving food. By calling his followers salt, Jesus was saying they have the power to preserve what's good in the world, to keep society from moral decay. But there's more. Salt enhances flavor. It makes bland food tasty. Jesus is telling us we have the ability to make life more vibrant, more enjoyable for those around us. But here's the kicker. Salt is only effective when it's mixed in. You can't influence from a distance. Jesus is calling us to be actively involved in our communities, our workplaces, our families. We're meant to be right in the thick of things, making a difference. Now light. A city on a hill cannot be hidden, Jesus says. He's talking about visibility and impact. In a world often shrouded in darkness, confusion, despair, immorality, followers of Jesus are meant to stand out, not in a showy, look-at-me way, but in a way that illuminates the path for others. Think about it. Light doesn't make noise. It doesn't force itself on anyone. It simply shines, and by its very nature, it dispels darkness. Jesus is saying that our lives should be like that, a quiet but unmistakable force for good that helps others find their way. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He says, "Let your light shine before others." that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This is crucial. The purpose of our influence isn't self-promotion. It's to point people to God. Our good works aren't meant to make us look good, but to reflect the goodness of God. Here's where it gets really challenging. Being salt and light isn't always comfortable. Salt can sting when applied to a wound. Light can be unwelcome to those who prefer darkness. Jesus is preparing us for the reality that our influence might not always be appreciated, but he's also assuring us that it's necessary. In today's world, where social media amplifies every voice and opinion, Jesus' call to be salt and light takes on new dimensions. It's about being a voice of reason in heated online debates. It's about posting content that uplifts rather than tears down. It's about being a source of hope in your social circles when everything seems bleak. But it's not just about what we say. It's about how we live. Do our actions match our words? Are we living in a way that makes others curious about the source of our joy, our peace, our love? Jesus is calling us to an influence that goes beyond imagination. He's inviting us to be agents of change, beacons of hope, and catalysts for good in a world that desperately needs it. It's a high calling, but with it comes the promise of impact beyond anything we could achieve on our own. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. With these words, Jesus set the stage for one of the most radical reinterpretations of religious law in history. What follows is a series of statements that would have left his listeners stunned, challenging everything they thought they knew about righteousness. Jesus begins by affirming the law, but then he does something unprecedented. He goes beyond the letter of the law to expose its spirit. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder," he starts. Simple enough, right? But then comes the bombshell. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. In one stroke, Jesus expands the commandment against murder to include the anger that often precedes it. He's saying that the root of the problem, the anger in our hearts, is just as serious in God's eyes as the act of murder itself. It's not just about controlling our actions. It's about transforming our hearts. He does the same with adultery. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Again, Jesus is pushing past external behavior to internal attitudes. He's saying that purity isn't just about what we do. It's about who we are at our core. This pattern continues as Jesus addresses divorce, oaths, retaliation, and love for enemies. In each case, he takes a familiar law and radically deepens its meaning. He's not content with mere outward compliance. He's after heart-level transformation. When Jesus says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect," he's not setting an impossible standard. He's pointing to the ultimate goal of the law, to make us more like God. It's an invitation to a new way of living that goes far beyond rule-keeping. This interpretation would have been shocking to Jesus' audience. The religious leaders of the day were focused on meticulous observance of external rules. Jesus was saying that wasn't enough. He was calling for a righteousness that surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. But here's the truly revolutionary part. Jesus isn't just raising the bar impossibly high. He's showing us our need for a Savior. By exposing the true depth of God's law, he's revealing how far short we all fall. And in doing so, he's preparing the way for the grace that he would ultimately provide through his death and resurrection. This teaching challenges us today just as much as it did its original audience. It calls us to examine not just our actions, but our motivations. It asks us to consider not just what we do, but who we are becoming. It reminds us that true righteousness isn't about following a set of rules, but about being transformed from the inside out. Jesus' interpretation of the law isn't about burden. It's about freedom. It's about moving from a mindset of mere compliance to one of love-driven obedience. It's about understanding that God's law isn't meant to restrict us, but to show us the path to true fulfillment and joy. In essence, Jesus is revealing the heart of God's law, and it's all about the condition of our hearts. This is the shocking, transformative truth at the center of the Sermon on the Mount. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he wasn't just giving them a new religious ritual. He was introducing a revolutionary way of approaching God that would transform their understanding of spirituality and their relationship with the divine. The Lord's Prayer, or Our Father, is far more than a simple recitation. It's a paradigm shift in how we communicate with God. Jesus begins with Our Father in heaven. This simple phrase is groundbreaking. In a world where gods were often seen as distant, fearsome beings, Jesus invites us to approach God as a loving parent. It's intimate yet respectful, personal yet acknowledging God's transcendence. This sets the tone for a prayer that balances reverence with relationship. Hallowed be your name follows. It's a call to recognize God's holiness, but it's more than that. It's an invitation to participate in making God's name honored in the world. We're not just passive observers of God's glory. We're active participants in revealing it to others. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. This isn't a passive wish. It's a bold declaration. Jesus is teaching us to align our desires with God's cosmic plan. It's about bringing heaven's reality into our earthly existence. It challenges us to be agents of God's kingdom in our daily lives. Next comes, give us today our daily bread. After focusing on God's grandeur, Jesus brings us to our basic needs. It's a reminder of our dependence on God, but also of God's concern for our everyday lives. It teaches us to trust God for provision, living one day at a time, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. This line links our receiving forgiveness with our giving it. It's a challenging concept that places responsibility on us to extend the same grace we hope to receive. It's about breaking cycles of resentment and embracing a lifestyle of forgiveness. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. This acknowledges our vulnerability and need for divine protection. It's not about God tempting us, but about seeking his guidance to avoid pitfalls and his strength to resist evil. The structure of this prayer is itself revolutionary. It begins with God's character and purposes before moving to our needs. It teaches us to prioritize God's will over our wants, to see our lives in the context of his larger plan. But perhaps the most radical aspect of this prayer is its simplicity and accessibility. In a religious culture often characterized by complex rituals and lengthy prayers, Jesus offers a concise, powerful template that anyone can use. It's not about impressing God with eloquence, but about sincere communication. Moreover, this prayer is communal. Jesus teaches us to say, Our Father, not my Father. It reminds us that we're part of a larger family of faith, interconnected in our approach to God. The Lord's Prayer also challenges the transactional view of prayer, the idea that if we say the right words, God will give us what we want. Instead, it's about aligning our hearts with God's purposes and trusting in his provision and protection. In essence, Jesus is reimagining prayer not as a religious duty, but as a transformative conversation that shapes our perspective, priorities, and actions. It's a prayer that, if truly internalized, has the power to revolutionize not just our prayer life, but our entire approach to living. This prayer, given on a hillside in Galilee, continues to challenge and inspire believers worldwide. It's a constant reminder that prayer isn't about changing God's mind, but about changing our hearts to align with his will. It's not just words to be recited, but a lifestyle to be lived. In a world obsessed with financial stability, social status, and material possessions, Jesus drops a bombshell in the Sermon on the Mount. He reveals a secret to security that's so counterintuitive, it's revolutionary. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, he says, challenging the very foundation of what most people consider security. Jesus isn't advocating for irresponsibility or poverty. He's addressing something much deeper, our tendency to find our sense of worth and safety in temporal things. He points out the fleeting nature of earthly treasures, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. In today's terms, he might mention market crashes, inflation, or obsolescence. The point is clear: earthly treasures are inherently insecure. Instead, Jesus offers an alternative: Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. But what does this mean practically? It's about investing in things with eternal value, acts of kindness, growth in character, relationships built on love, and a deepening connection with God. These are the treasures that can't be stolen or destroyed. Jesus then makes a profound statement. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He's highlighting a psychological and spiritual truth. What we value most shapes our desires, decisions, and ultimately, our character. If our security is in earthly treasures, our hearts will be tied to the fluctuations of this world. But if our treasure is in heaven, our hearts find an anchor that's immovable. To drive his point home, Jesus uses a vivid metaphor. The eye is the lamp of the body. He's talking about perspective, about how we see the world. If our eye is healthy, if our perspective is aligned with God's values, our whole life will be full of light. But if our vision is clouded by materialism or self-interest, we're living in darkness, even if we think we're secure. Then comes one of the most challenging statements. No one can serve two masters. Jesus is addressing the divided loyalties in our hearts. We can't claim God as our ultimate security while functionally putting our trust in wealth or status. It's an either-or proposition, and Jesus is clear about which choice leads to true security. But Jesus doesn't leave us with mere philosophy. He provides practical advice for living out this radical security. Do not worry about your life, he says, pointing to the birds and flowers as examples of God's faithful provision. This isn't a call to irresponsibility, but to trust. It's about recognizing that anxiety about material needs doesn't add anything to our lives. It only diminishes our peace. Jesus challenges us to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. This is the key to unshakable security. It's about aligning our priorities with God's, trusting that as we do so, everything else will fall into place. This doesn't mean life will be easy or that we'll have everything we want. It means we'll have everything we need, including a peace that surpasses understanding. This teaching is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. In a world of economic uncertainty, social upheaval, and constant change, Jesus offers a security that's not tied to external circumstances. It's a security rooted in the unchanging nature of God and the eternal values of his kingdom. Living this way requires a radical shift in thinking. It means evaluating our choices not by their immediate benefit, but by their eternal impact. It means finding our identity not in what we have, but in whose we are. It's about building our lives on the solid rock of God's truth rather than the shifting sands of worldly security. This is the secret to unshakable security, a trust in God so deep that it frees us from the anxieties that often drive our lives. It's a security that allows us to live generously, love freely, and face the future with confidence, knowing that our true treasure is secure in heaven. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. These words of Jesus have been quoted, misquoted, and debated for centuries. But what did Jesus really mean when he spoke about judging others? The answer is far more nuanced and challenging than many realize. At first glance, it might seem like Jesus is advocating for a live and let live mentality, where we never form opinions about others' actions. But that's not the case. Jesus is addressing something much deeper, the human tendency to criticize others while overlooking our own faults. He uses a vivid, almost comical image to drive his point home. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? It's a powerful metaphor that highlights the absurdity of our often skewed perspective. We're quick to notice and point out minor flaws in others while being oblivious to our own glaring shortcomings. But here's where Jesus adds a surprising twist. He doesn't just say, "Don't judge." He says, "First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." This is crucial. Jesus isn't prohibiting all forms of judgment or discernment. He's calling for self-examination before we attempt to correct others. This teaching challenges us on multiple levels. First, it calls for radical honesty with ourselves. It's easy to justify our own actions while being critical of others. Jesus is saying, look inward first. Deal with your own issues before you try to fix someone else. Secondly, it redefines the purpose of judgment. The goal isn't to condemn or feel superior, it's to help. Jesus talks about removing the speck from our brother's eye, a delicate, caring action. True, godly judgment is motivated by love and a desire to see others grow. Jesus goes on to say, "Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs." This might seem harsh, but it's a reminder that discernment is necessary. We need wisdom to know when and how to share truth, and with whom. Not everyone will be receptive to spiritual insights or correction. The teaching on judgment is closely tied to Jesus' words about asking, seeking, and knocking. He encourages us to approach God for wisdom and discernment. This suggests that true, righteous judgment comes from aligning our perspective with God's, not relying solely on our own understanding. Jesus concludes this section with what we often call the golden rule. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. This principle applies profoundly to how we judge. Before we criticize or correct someone, we should ask ourselves, how would I want to be approached if I were in their situation? This teaching on judgment is revolutionary because it calls us to a higher standard. It's not about ignoring sin or pretending everything is okay. It's about approaching correction with humility, self-awareness, and love. It's about recognizing that we're all flawed and in need of grace. In our current culture of online shaming, cancel culture, and polarized debates, Jesus' words are more relevant than ever. They challenge us to pause before we post that critical comment, to reflect before we jump to conclusions about someone's motives, to examine our own hearts before we point fingers. Ultimately, Jesus is calling us to a community characterized by humility, grace, and mutual growth. He's inviting us to create spaces where people feel safe to acknowledge their faults, where correction is offered in love, and where we're all committed to helping each other become better. This doesn't mean we never make judgments. It means we judge wisely, carefully, and always with the goal of restoration and growth. It means we approach others with the same grace and patience we hope to receive. In doing so, we create a culture that reflects the heart of God, a heart that is both just and merciful, that calls us to righteousness while offering forgiveness and hope. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. These words of Jesus have often been interpreted as a call to rigid, restrictive living. But that's not what Jesus had in mind. The narrow gate is not about limitation. It's about liberation. First, let's consider what Jesus means by the wide gate and broad road. He's referring to the path of least resistance, the way that requires no real commitment or change. It's comfortable, popular, and easy to follow. In our modern context, it might be the pursuit of success at any cost, the indulgence of every desire, or the adoption of whatever beliefs are currently trendy. It's wide because it accommodates every kind of self-centered living. The narrow gate, by contrast, requires intention. It's not stumbled upon by accident. Jesus says few find it, implying that it takes effort and discernment to locate. This isn't about exclusivity. It's about choice. Everyone is invited, but not everyone chooses to enter. But here's where many misunderstand. The narrowness isn't about a list of rules or restrictive behaviors. It's about focus. The narrow gate represents a life aligned with God's purposes, a life of love, integrity, and selflessness. It's narrow because it requires us to leave behind baggage that doesn't fit, things like pride, selfishness, and fear. Jesus is presenting a paradox. The path that seems restrictive actually leads to the fullest life possible. It's like an athlete training for the Olympics. The regimen might seem limiting, but it's actually the way to achieve peak performance and fulfillment in their sport. The narrow gate also challenges our tendency to compartmentalize our faith. It's not about being religious in one area of life while living however we want in others. It's a call to integrated, wholehearted living where every aspect of our life is brought into alignment with God's will. This teaching confronts our desire for easy answers and quick fixes. The narrow way isn't a shortcut to an easy life. It's the path of transformation. It involves struggles, challenges, and growth. But it's through these experiences that we find true life, purpose, and joy. Jesus' words here are also a warning against complacency. It's easy to assume we're on the right path just because we're following the crowd or adhering to cultural norms. The narrow gate requires us to question our assumptions, examine our motives, and constantly realign our lives with God's truth. Importantly, Jesus doesn't say the narrow gate leads to a solitary journey. While the decision to enter is personal, the path itself is walked in community. It's narrow, but we walk it alongside others who have made the same choice, supporting and encouraging one another. The imagery of the gate also implies a decisive moment of entry. There's a clear distinction between being on one side or the other. This challenges the notion that we can perpetually straddle the fence, keeping one foot in God's way and one in the world's. Jesus is calling for commitment. But let's be clear, entering through the narrow gate isn't about earning salvation through our efforts. It's about responding to God's grace and allowing it to reshape our lives. The gate is narrow because it's shaped like Christ. To pass through it means to align ourselves with His character and purposes. In our world of endless options and customizable experiences, the idea of a narrow way can seem unappealing. But Jesus is offering something countercultural, a life of clarity, purpose, and ultimate fulfillment. It's not about restriction, but about finding our true selves as we were created to be. The narrow gate leads to a life that's rich, deep, and meaningful. It's a life free from the burdens of guilt, purposelessness, and fear. It's narrow not because it's limited, but because it's precise, accurately aligned with the way we were designed to live. In essence, Jesus is inviting us to a life of beautiful, purposeful focus. It's a call to shed whatever holds us back and to step into the fullness of life as God intended. The gate may be narrow, but the life it leads to is infinitely expansive. As Jesus concludes his revolutionary Sermon on the Mount, he leaves his listeners with a powerful metaphor that encapsulates the essence of his teachings. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. With this simple illustration, Jesus drives home a profound truth about the nature of a life well lived. The image is vivid. 2 houses, 2 builders, 2 very different outcomes. One house stands firm against the storm, while the other collapses spectacularly. The difference, the foundation. Jesus is making it clear that the foundation of our lives matters more than any external factors. But what does it mean to build on rock? Jesus isn't talking about literal construction techniques. He's referring to the basis on which we construct our lives, our values, our decisions, and our relationships. The rock represents his teachings, not just knowing them, but living them out. Notice that both houses in the parable face the same storm. Jesus isn't promising a life free from challenges or hardships. Rain, streams, and winds come to both houses. This is a crucial point. Following Jesus doesn't exempt us from life's difficulties. The difference is in how we weather those storms. The wise builder, Jesus says, is the one who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. It's not enough to simply listen to Jesus' teachings or to agree with them intellectually. The solid foundation comes from application, from allowing these truths to reshape our lives from the ground up. This challenges the common notion that faith is just about belief. Jesus is saying that true faith, the kind that provides an unshakable foundation, is active. It's about aligning our actions with our beliefs, about living out the principles of the kingdom in our day-to-day lives. The foolish builder, on the other hand, hears the same words but doesn't act on them. This represents a superficial engagement with Jesus' teachings. It might look good on the surface, the house might appear impressive, but without a solid foundation, it's ultimately unstable. Jesus is also addressing the human tendency to seek quick fixes and easy solutions. Building on rock takes time, effort, and intentionality. It's not about finding a shortcut to stability, but about the patient, consistent work of aligning our lives with God's truth. The metaphor of building also implies a process. Our lives are constructed decision by decision, habit by habit. Jesus is encouraging us to consider the long-term implications of our choices. Are we building in a way that will stand the test of time and trials? Moreover, the image of a house reminds us that our lives affect others. How we build doesn't just impact us, but also those who dwell with us, our families, friends, and communities. A life built on rock provides shelter and security for others as well. Jesus concludes with a stark contrast. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. The language is dramatic, emphasizing the catastrophic consequences of building our lives on anything less than the solid foundation of God's truth. This teaching challenges us to examine the foundation of our lives. What are we building on? Is it the shifting sands of cultural trends, personal preferences, or worldly success? Or is it the solid rock of Jesus' teachings, love, justice, mercy, and faith in God? Building on rock isn't just about personal stability. It's about being part of something larger than ourselves. It's about contributing to the construction of God's kingdom on earth, about being living examples of a different way of life. Ultimately, Jesus is offering us a choice that has eternal implications. Will we be wise builders, anchoring our lives in His truth? Or will we risk everything on a foundation that cannot withstand life's inevitable storms? The invitation is clear: build your life on the rock. It's not the easiest path, but it's the only one that leads to true stability, purpose, and peace. In a world of uncertainty, Jesus offers us a foundation that cannot be shaken, a life built on His unchanging truth and love. And that's our journey through the Sermon on the Mount. These teachings from Jesus are more than just beautiful words. They're challenges for us to live in a deeper, more meaningful way. Take a moment to reflect. How can these lessons transform your life? Maybe it's time to reassess your priorities, seek a happiness that goes beyond the superficial, or simply be a light in someone else's world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new content. And be sure to click on one of the next videos above to continue your spiritual journey with us. Let's close with a prayer. Dear God, we thank you for the words of wisdom that Jesus left us. Help us to apply them in our daily lives, seeking true happiness, being a light to others, and building our lives on the solid rock of your truth. May we live with integrity, love, and compassion, always reflecting your love. Amen. See you next time, and may you have a blessed week.